abstract, so it's a talk about XCP-ng, which can be summed up as chunky community port hypervisor based on Zen, and I could also add the word open source, but you know, it didn't fit one line. So it's basically a fork of Zen server, as I said. And before starting, I'm the founder and CEO of Base, which is a small company in France building open source products. I'm a former system administrator. I've used Zen since 2008. And you can reach us on Twitter, and if you want to take a look at the XCP-ng website, you can go there. So I'll do a quick recap, because it's almost 1 year since we decided to do that fork. So I think I didn't write the word Citrix in any slides, but I have to explain a bit the decision. So as Gael said, it's because Citrix decided to remove some features of the free edition, and then we had to make a fork to be sure our users will continue to use a solution based on Zen, because basically before doing this fork, we did Zen Orchestra, which is a management solution for Zen server. So for us, it makes sense to do something that continues to work based on Zen. But we didn't really thought at the time, when you are in 2018 and you are forking in a hypervisor, you are not in 2008 and everyone is talking about containers, etc. So we have, to be frank, frankly, we have some doubts. Is it still interesting to do something open source and to fork in a hypervisor in 2018? So we decided to try to understand if there is people asking for that. So to do this, we did a Kickstarter. So last February, so we started a campaign, and in less than 24 hours, we just reached our goal. So by seeing that, we said, okay, people like to have something that's not just open source, but also turnkey, because the good thing about Zen server was the turnkey side of it. You just download the ISO, you install it on your server, and it works. You've got a great API to use on top of it, and well, a lot of people like to work with something like that. So it makes sense for us to make this fork. So thanks to the Kickstarter campaign, in April we made the first release of XCP-ng, which at the time was really a simple fork of Zen server 7.4. So exactly the same number, because we like at first start to stick on the Zen server project. And a few months later, we catch up with the 7.5 release, but this time we came with new features that aren't in the Zen server-based project. So for example, we added the initial ZFS support, so because a lot of people asked for more file system support. So that's why we started to add new features in the same time we start to really understand how it works, because when you fork a project, you need some time to grasp all the bits, and which package are where, how to package them, how to improve some stuff, the global architecture, etc. So especially with something like Zen server, which is in the end a Linux distribution by its own, because you boot on Zen with a specific Zen version, on a specific kernel of Linux then, and there is some CentOS packages, some Citrix packages, etc., etc. So you need some time to grasp the whole thing. So that's why the first release in April was just basically a one-to-one fork, but then we added features. In September, we started to actually sell support for it, because not because we planned to do that at first, but because people asked for it. We got some companies saying, okay, I don't want to pay for support for Zen server because I don't like the experience I had in the past, just an example. And they said, we'd like to have support to run this into production. So if you can sell support, you are the main editor, so it would make sense to sell support. So we started that. And in October, we just released 7.6, and this time we took time to do things properly. And by that I mean that all the repositories and the RPMs was signed with GPG keys. So it allows to start a good, I would say, a good community to grow and to make mirrors, and to start to use our packages without any security concerns. We also added the software RAID support, which allows, if you don't have any hardware RAID card, to just select your 2 disks and create the software ready and install the hypervisor inside it. So we did that in 1 year. So today, we kept the objective to be a solution that's easy to migrate from Zen Server, because a lot of people using Zen Server wanted to migrate to XCP-ng, but you need to do that in the easiest way possible. So right now, you just put the ISO of XCP-ng, and when you boot on it, it will detect the Zen Server version and say, okay, you can keep all your settings and just type enter, and that's it. So we managed to keep that. Obviously, we decided to remove the license stuff that you have in Zen Server, so there is no license daemon. In fact, there is one, but this one is always answering yes to all the API questions. So in fact, there is no license, there is no feature restriction, and as I said, the business model for our company is based all on support. Also, it's fully based on YAML date and the RPM stuff, which isn't the case with Zen Server at the first place, because they decided to use kind of strange package stuff, which is to download the ISO of updates on the Citrix website, and then you apply the ISO and it will appear. But in the end, inside there is RPM. So basically, we choose to rely entirely on this system, which is the default, the upstream system, because it's a CentOS-based .0 running. So when we do some updates, we just make the updates available in the main request service. So you just have to make the update, and everything is up to date. And today, the community was building a good community was the first objective for us before anything else, you know. And it went really well because, for example, on the forum, which is on xcp-ng.org/forum, we had a lot of contributors and a lot of threads every day. A lot of people asking very also technical question on can I do this or that, and it's fantastic because it gives you a lot of ideas on what to do in the future. So it's also a great place for inspiration for us. The numbers regarding the unique downloads are really interesting because it's almost 1 year and we got already a really nice number of people trying it, and it's unique downloads, so it means it's a lot of people testing it. I mean unique by the fact we are using the IP address, obviously. We also became a member of the Zen Security Pre-Disclosure List, which is a kind of a private list. You can apply to it, but you need to have some, you know, to tick some boxes to be inside it. There is inside it Amazon or other big cloud companies or people working with Zen projects. This is great because if there is a big problem, a big security problem in Zen, then you can have the notice before it's public, so you can patch it or integrate the patch inside your distro, XCP-ng for us. So this is really helpful for us to work. By the way, the Zen project got a really nice process for security patches. I said Zen project, not Zen server, so just the hypervisor, which is in the Linux Foundation, and they did a lot of work to get something, a good workflow to report problems and how to deal with them, etc. So if you want to know, you can read on the zen.org website a lot of how this process works, but it's really interesting. We are also working on, because Zen is inside the Linux Foundation, to become a kind of project also hosted in the Linux Foundation, but it's still not official yet, so not a word, please. It's in the pipes, and we hope to have something for Q1, but it could be a bit political, so this is something that we are doing step by step. And for now, today we are getting closer to the upstream. By that I mean we are doing a lot of work to get a more recent version of Zen, of the Linux kernel and CentOS inside XCP-ng. Because right now, Citrix is doing the Zen server something like, picking one version of Zen and backporting a lot of patches from the most recent version of Zen and doing the same for Linux or the CentOS packages. The main problem with that is when you do that, you freeze for a long time your distro, and it could be hard to, you will take a lot of time to backport, a lot of effort to backport all the patches. So we can do both. I mean, we can do something that's stable and verified, but in the meantime, we have the opportunity to get more recent version of the kernel. For example, it's really useful for drivers. If you have a really recent hardware, the kernel by default is 4.4. So, oops. So it could be really interesting to have something more recent inside your distro. So we are working on that, and believe me, it's not trivial, because just to give you an example, the Zen server default version of CentOS, the package in the CentOS used, even in the last Zen server version, is CentOS 7.2, and we are at 7.6 or something like that. So it could be also raise some security concerns. So we are working to be closer to research, because we think for some cases it will be easier to integrate last changes, and for people who want to test last changes, for example, in testing repository, they can just test last Zen or the last kernel and do some tests on it. Okay, so in the meantime, we also added a lot of new cool features right now in XCP-ng. We fixed a lot of bugs. In fact, some bugs were in Zen server in the first place, so we reported this to Citrix, and I would say 80% of the time with a solution in it, telling this is our patch, this fixes your problem, and our problem now too. We got a testing repo. For example, we got some customers having trouble with an old bundled driver in the Linux kernel, so we had to go to the I think it was a network card driver. We download the driver from directly the provider of the NIC, and we download the driver, package it properly, and make an RPM package -out. So the guy just had to yum install the driver -out, which is the most recent driver, and suddenly everything worked. So we can do that pretty easily because, well, this is exactly the kind of service we can provide for people having, for example, some trouble with old drivers. We got from the community signed Windows PV drivers, so we just paid for that, but it's someone from the community that made the process, because we are not really into Microsoft stuff. But anyway, it's basically taking the Zen PV drivers running inside Windows and sign them and telling, okay, we signed those drivers and we can bundle them. We couldn't bundle the Citrix drivers because for trademarks and copyright reasons, we couldn't do that. But so the community asked, okay, but I want to use your driver. I don't want to go to the Citrix website and download Zen server and extract the Windows driver and use zone on top of XCP-ng. So we had to do that. Also, the community, and I think it was probably Shake that done some work on integrating with CloudStack, or I think the 7.4 or 7.5, I can't remember exactly. And finally, something that we just did and that should be available in the next weeks is to use the ZST compression support. If you know with Zen server, when you export a VM, and if you choose to use compression, it's really, really, really slow because it uses JZip. So basically, when you export a VM on a local NVMe drive, this is the time in minutes. It's, let's say, 30 seconds to do the export of the VM without compression. But if you use the compression to do that, it's more than 5 minutes, because the JZip implementation is mono-threaded and the bottleneck is 1 core. So it's really, really slow. And so we decided to add into the API, it's called Zappy, the ZST, which is a compression algorithm made by Facebook, which is pretty recent, but works really well. We ended with exactly the same time that I'm doing without compression, but in the end, the file was only half the size, almost, of the original backup. So this is both considerably faster than the original compression, but even better inside with the result, which is a bit, lighter than the JZip results. So this is really interesting because in Zen Orchestra we are relying on VM export for doing some backups operation. So this is on the local disk, but if you do that, for example, on NFS share, because the file is half the size, then basically a backup is twice as fast. So this is not a huge stuff. I mean, it's maybe, let's say, 200, 300 lines into the Zappy, but it was merged pretty recently into the Zappy, because Zappy is the API and it's fully open source and also hosted as a Zen project from Linux Foundation. So we were, in fact, the first external contributor external from, not from Citrix people, who had some code merged inside the Zappy. So we were the first, and they accepted to merge this code. We don't know if Citrix will get this feature inside Zen server. That's not our decision, but it's now in upstream in XCP-ng. So that's why our way to do that is to do upstream first. This is, I think, the right way to do stuff in the open source world. So this is all the stuff we did or almost did this year. So what's next? Well, we know that, as I said earlier, that forking something is a lot of job to do. So we want to have a bigger team on site. What I mean on site is inside the company, having people working full-time on this. So we want to scale up to 6 people dedicated to XCP-ng. So it means people from the API. So it's in OCaml, so you need to have people knowing OCaml. It's not something that you can find really easily, so you have to find that kind of guys. We have already some people working on packaging, but we want people working on, let's say, the hypervisor itself, the storage capabilities, QEMU stuff. So we need a team of system developers, basically. And again, this is not something that, I mean, it's easier to find web developers than system developers. I know that because originally we are doing a web application with Zen Orchestra, and it's completely another challenge to find that kind of task. But we already made some hires, and we think we can go up to 6 people to get this subject. Another interesting thing is that I learned almost by accident that, at least in France, the academic world is working a lot on Zen. And I asked guys why you are doing that much work on Zen, and they're telling me that for a lot of reasons, and especially that the fact Zen is pretty small, that when you get a student that will do a PhD, you have enough time to understand the whole Zen thing without having to learn everything about the kernel, the Linux kernel, which is far bigger. So because Zen is a kind of micro-kernel, it's not that huge, you can learn the entire thing during your PhD. So in the end, a lot of research done on Zen, and also because Zen is used in large cloud deployments, it's really interesting. For example, if you can just get 10% performance boost in research with Zen, you can imagine that for a large cloud provider, that's could be huge. So that's why a lot of people, at least in the academic world in France, are working with Zen. So we got 3 pretty big labs working with us right now in 3 locations in France, and they did a lot of already publication on Zen, for example, on NUMA, on basically Zen performances and that kind of stuff. So that's really interesting to have that kind of people. That could be people who are already published, but also they are students in PhD, so that's really, really interesting. Also, there is nice opportunities to do some research, some collaboration with other universities in Europe, because there's some projects that you can do with those unis. So we are searching for other universities to work with us, because the European Union can help you to do that kind of research. We'll see that later. So in the end, it means for the next year, we can reach up to 20 people working on XCP-ng. By that I mean both researchers, engineers, and contractors. Because obviously when we started, we relied a bit on contractors, because those people were having some really advanced experience working with Zen, for example, ex-Citrix people, able to point to exactly, oh, you got this problem, so you should take a look there. So combining all the 3 kinds of people is really, really powerful, because you can have nice synergies between people. Also, we are working with medium to large companies. Maybe I will say more to see what can be interesting for them, and there's some fields of research that we will develop because some big companies ask about that. And obviously, if you have an idea, if you are working in Zen server or Zen, or you're interested by some of the research there, you can contact me. Just to give you some example of research and development that we have in mind, as you can see, it's both for storage, network, and compute. So it's almost a full spectrum of optimization that we can think of. On the storage role, I put that in first because I think this is where there is the most room for improvement inside XCP-ng. Because the architecture of the storage back in Zen server was made with the storage that you had at the time, which were mostly slow HDD. And then the storage world was, it was a revolution with SSDs, and even more today with NVMe drives, which are really, really fast. So you can do a lot to improve that. Regarding the network stuff, it's coming mainly from bigger companies that want to have more cloudish features like PX line support, that kind of stuff. And regarding the compute stuff, there is, as I said, improving the Zen scheduler for some workloads. There's a lot of nice publication made regarding that by the university I told you before that can improve even what I could say a generic workload by, let's say, 10 to 20%. So that's really interesting. But the academic world is doing a bit of code, which can be great. They just made the publication and then that's it. They don't make the gap between the publication and the upstream. So also one of our goal is to push those guys to go, not just to drop some line of code on GitHub, but also to integrate that inside the Zen upstream. So this is, I think, how it should be done, but we know that the academic world, the work is done when you finish to publish. So we had to help them to go until the patch is actually, for example, inside Zen. And what's also interesting with research and development, especially in France, is that you have publications, so you have benchmarks, all the data is accessible, and you also, the government will help you to finance partly this kind of research. So it's really interesting because everything is done so you can work with universities. I took one example, which is the NVMe drives. As I said, those drives are really, really powerful. They can do a lot of IOPS, okay? The main problem is, today, when you do virtualization, the bottleneck is often the CPU. Because as I said, the architecture of the storage, when it was done at the time with slow HDD, and maybe, well, it's not an exaggeration, but today it's really hard to go to, with a virtualization stack, to use the full power of those drives. That's because there's a lot of layers in the storage stack, there are a lot of interrupts, etc. So your CPU can't keep up. So one way to do that is to removing layers by doing, for example, emulation right inside the VM. So the VM will see a PCI devices, which is for example, the NVMe drive, and then it will send order, and physically we will just slice, for example, 20 gigs for this VM, but it will be seen as a real drive. So no translation of PCI Express instruction, nothing. It will be straight to go to the hardware that just slice and the size of the VM disk. So I already had a really interesting talks with Zen guys, and the concept is pretty clear. So the next step would be to ask some labs to make at least a proof of concept and some initial benchmark and some publication about that, and see if we can go deeper and maybe have for the next year a kind of driver when you create the VM to say, okay, I want to use the NVMe emulation inside the guest, and I will use this physical drive to do that, and put this, and then you will be near the bare metal performances of the storage. So this is one example of what we can do the next year. Regarding the technical improvements, which aren't really research and development, but more incremental optimization. For example, for the XCP-ng project, we're working to get something that's entirely automated to build our RPM. So with that, we're using Koji, which is used, I think, by some other distro, maybe like Fedora or CentOS. I don't remember exactly. We want to have a fully automated QA to be able to build an ISO and to install it and make some tests on a lot of different hardware. So we have some partners interested to let's say, use some of their servers in their data center so we can boot XCP-ng on it and check that everything is okay on the latest build. We also are working on the mirror management to be able to have anyone want to contribute easily to just sign up somewhere and add the URL of the repository, and because everything is signed, it's not a problem, and we could have really interesting stats. I think we are using, I don't remember the name of the project, but it's the same software used by VLC to distribute their software all around the world. And we want to improve the Ceph support, the ZFS support, QCO2 with a way to store your virtual image. Right now, this is a new storage stack of Zen server, so we want to use it because the legacy stack is using VHD files, which are limited in terms of size at 2 terabyte max. So the new storage stack is really interesting. The main problem is the API is fully open source, but since they decided to remove feature, all the new implementation based on that are closed source. So we have to develop our own drivers, but I'm not concerned about that because the API is completely open source. Improve compression, you saw the example with that STD, but in the future we also want to compress the disk export, because the VM export can be compressed but not the disk export right now. So we will do that also, and many more ideas that we have in mind. Regarding Zen Orchestra, to give you a quick glimpse, if you don't know what is Zen Orchestra, it's a way to manage XCP-ng and Zen server. It's like, if you know more VMware, you know the equivalent is vCenter, vSphere clients. It does basic tasks like migrating, patching hosts, whatever, some backup, some resource delegation, but it's really, really basic. And we want to add some features to be, to have something that's fully, the whole stack. It's not just the hypervisor, but the hypervisor plus the management stuff. So it's really interesting. And we got some, the objective is to be able to connect to an S3 storage, for example, if you want to store your VMs wherever you want in the cloud. To have backup proxies, a small virtual appliance running in different places. So when you make a backup, the data doesn't have to flow back and forth in useless places. So you just make some optimized backup. And we are working on a new UI because we have some large users with many VMs, and when we built the UI the first place, we didn't think people could use Zen Orchestra with that bigger infrastructure, so we had to rethink a bit. So for the next year we plan to rewrite it and just picking the right bits of what the guy is actually looking. For example, if you are going on the main page, you have just maybe 10 or 20 VMs displayed, but for now we are downloading all the VMs despite it's useless. So this is the new UI will be for the next year. So if you want to help one way or another the XCP-ng projects, there's a lot of ways to do that. You can contribute because, as I said, the community is really, really great. There is a really interesting project called Eurostars Eureka.eu, which is the European Union funding some research projects, and to do that, we need some partners, could be labs or companies in multiple countries. It's not just the European Union. I think there is also Canada and other countries around the world.
How does that work with the UK?
I think right now, no, but seriously, right now you are on the map. So we can also have some help regarding the QA with more hardware or data center space. Basically, using it is also helping the project, because if you have any problem, that's interesting for us. Obviously, getting pro support if you want to run into production. But, well, I think I've told you everything about the news regarding XCP-ng and Zen Orchestra, but as you may see, it will be really an interesting year because we are putting a lot of effort to improving it. And that's funny because I feel there is the same thing, that's how CloudStack can be seen by the public. a lot of people using Zen behind the scene, because you go to any conference and people say, yeah, I'm also using Zen, but nobody talk about it. And this is a problem of perception. And what we could do with the XCP-ng project is to maybe shed more light towards Zen and explaining that actually there is people using it, there is researcher playing on it and improving every day. So that's bad that all this work cannot be seen. So this is also one of our work is to show that. So this is one of the objectives on working on XCP-ng. And that's it. If you have questions, go ahead. Yes?
So you talked about NVMe and effectively what sounded to me like direct access from the VM. So that sounds like vVols, VMware vVols.
I don't know a lot about VMware, but in fact the trigger about this research was a discussion with the Nutanix guys working on KVM and having exactly the same issues. And in fact the guy was previously working at Citrix and made the Zen server storage architecture. So it was really interesting, and that's what's cool, because the work done on KVM is fully open source. So he explained exactly what should be done. It's his opinion, but I was with Zen guys too, so we had time to draw some idea on the paper, and finally we got something that makes sense. I mean, that's possible to do with Zen. So we hope at least to have a proof of concept for the next year. I don't know then, because I don't have enough experience doing that low-level stuff, because I just hired the team, but I think we could have at least some benchmarks and interesting things done on the next year. So, yeah.
So the problem there is not going to be then that, because you're going to have then a large number of storage repositories effectively.
Sorry?
You're going to have a large number of SRs against your storage repositories on your Zen server effect, which scales very badly in Zen server.
The thing is, there is, I think, I'm not Citrix, but the goal for them was to have more control on the products, and they thought that more control means closing all the new development on it. And that's not my philosophy, but I respect their decision. But because it's open source, well, we could fork it. And what does it mean in the future? Yeah, it means that we can't tell for how long we will be 100% compatible with Zen server. I mean, just for the ZST compression stuff, we will expose that in the API, and Zen Orchestra will expose that in the UI. So when you do a backup, you will have the choice to use the compression algorithm. But we don't know if Citrix will use that. If they don't, then it will just fail if you do that on Zen server. So we will push everything upstream, and then it's not up to us to decide if it will be inside Zen server. So I can't really guess about the gap, but there is chances that they decide or not to do it, and maybe the gap will grow. I can't tell, but before it's growing, the goal was to stay close to it, to be compatible, to be able to upgrade. So we will keep that in mind even if the gap is growing, because if it's adding features, it's easy to migrate from something that's older to newer, so this will be fine. But then if you are using maybe in 1 year or 2 year a version of Zen server and trying to get back to an older version of XCP-ng, I don't think this will work. But, well, if they catch up, that will be fine. If they don't, that's not my call. Any other question? No?
One question. I used recently a sort of competitor to you. It's called Proxmox. Maybe you're aware of it.
Yeah.
They have a very nice. They've just implemented cloud init support.
Yeah, we did that. Yeah.
Are you going to add it as well?
It's already there.
Oh, it's already there.
We did that in Zen Orchestra 2 years ago.
Okay.
Okay. So basically, you can do that from the.
But it's not in SAPI, is it?
Nope. But it's not exactly, but it's really not complicated to do that in the management panel, because you just have to create an extra drive to make a fat system inside and just get the contents inside it. But basically, we want to Zen Orchestra being the de facto default standards management interface for it. So if you use Zen Orchestra, which is also fully open source, you can use already cloud init with it.
Okay.
So it's meant to be used both with XCP-ng and Zen Orchestra to create let's say, a whole stack of virtualization.
I understand. But on its own XCP-ng, if I were just to use the
the
console thingy, I would
no. Yeah.
Okay.
You need to go with Xenocus, which is basically you got a server part and a web UI or
yes, like open client.
Yeah.
I understand. Okay,
Yeah,
so it's already there. That's really
cool. You got cloud in support there and many other stuff. That's like there is no direct backup features inside the API of Zen API or XCP-ng or Zen server, but on top of it, you can build those by doing exports, delta exports, etc. in Zen Orchestra.
Yeah.
That's why the backup is done with Zen Orchestra, and we like to keep the API simple, doing simple operations, and this is the management panel that is doing the complicated stuff.
Yeah, I guess it's a better idea to keep that thing
Small
simple and clean
bricks,
and do
easy,
your
exactly.
complex stuff in your.
That's better because then
level.
you end with something really hard to maintain.
Yeah, that's true. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Olivier. Time for a coffee, guys. Let's take about 15 minutes, grab a coffee.